What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another episode of Alfalfa. I am a little upset with you guys for not being with me at Permissionless in West Palm Beach, here with Blockworks and Bankless, having a grand old time, going to a little party tonight with Optimism. You guys are going to miss the Alfalfa. You're going to have to pay me.
Get me all sad. I really am.
Are you?
I have FOMO. Yeah. I would rather be out in Florida than in the dark trading hole I've been in for the last 4 days, believe me.
I just want to go to that party.
Yeah, this party tonight's going to be great. Little Bankless Optimism party. I'm excited, but let's bring the Alfalfa. Very excited about this episode. Agenda today for our 3 segments: investing. We're talking about the biggest mistakes we've made in investing in crypto or investing in general. And then for our policy segment, we're going to talk about the air quotes here, Ministry of Truth, President Biden's Homeland Security Disinformation Governance Board. I'm actually personally very excited to talk about that one. It's a juicy topic. And last but not least, we'll wrap up with more mistakes, biggest mistakes in business. In general, business, maybe even life, if you want to include any guys, but just running a business, starting a business, whatever that might be. And hop into our Discord, links below in the description. Good stuff happening in the Discord in general. And last but not least, check out Collective Shift, collectiveshift.io. Actually was just told by our head of customer success that this week they have onboarding calls with 2 people who joined our pro membership. That basically anybody who joins Collective Shift and gets a pro membership gets like a free onboarding call with our head of customer success. They get to ask their questions, talk about crypto, get fully onboarded into our platform, and talk about your portfolio, maybe even get some advice and feedback on what you're doing. And they were like, yeah, apparently these 2 people that are coming on this week that I'm talking to are from the Alfalfa podcast listeners. So That's awesome. Thanks for joining. I hope you guys love it. And in general, if you're listening in a bear market, I think it's a good time to get educated. It's a good time to build. It's a good time to get educated. So links to everything below. Make sure to use our code Alfalfa for a discount as well. Anything else, guys? We're good.
You rock.
Yes. So do we want to do an Alfalfa round this week? Yeah. All right. Let's do it. I figured I'm so excited for the segments, but
always Alfalfa round.
Okay. Nick, why don't you rip it off?
I have a small misstep yesterday. It's Alfalfa that was slightly missed. Squandered. I was actually talking with Eric about this. I placed yesterday. So today's recording this on Wednesday. Yesterday, we heard from Chairman Powell on some comments on inflation and interest rate hikes. So I decided to place some puts yesterday for QQQ, which is a NASDAQ index, and ARK-K after consultations with Eric with various expirations. Except I placed them like 10 minutes before market close, and I realized that the funds I had transferred in had not been cleared for trading yet. There's cash in there. But when I went to go make the trades, they didn't go through. And so today they would have been, I think all blended would have been a 70% return today on those puts.
TradFi.
Missed the largest market down run since 2020. So that was, I'm going to be bitter through tonight. And then tomorrow I'll forget about it. But yeah, I'm going to continue to kind of strategize hedging against a further downturn. And gonna consult with you guys on it. And yeah, so anyway, that was my Alfalfa play that I kind of missed. And if you ever complain about Bitcoin and Ethereum network transaction times, holy shit, try to remember what it's like to wire money from one bank to another and how long it takes. It was 3 business days, still hadn't cleared. So anyway, that's what I attempted to do yesterday and will likely attempt to do in the next week or so as well.
And my Alfalfa rounds are pretty simple. My funds were cleared, and I did that trade.
Fuck.
Thank you for the nudge.
Easy.
Should have just texted you at 12:58. Help, please. Let me borrow some money in your account.
Yeah, those are printing.
Yeah.
Huge
yeah,
down day
yeah.
today.
Yeah. Those
Well
are
done,
big.
guys. Well done.
Yeah.
I managed to fire off a very large portfolio of shitcoin shorts yesterday.
I
So
love that.
it's playing out nicely today.
Is shitcoin
I'm
shorts?
basically DCAing into shitcoin shorts as like this is my 2022 investment strategy.
So we talked
Treating
about
them as like negative investments, basically.
I love them. I think like we talked about maybe 6 months ago, stablecoin farming was probably the best investment available. And I think right now, shorting shit coins is the best investment available.
Yeah, stablecoin farming is dead. It died very quickly, very quick and abrupt death. And like so many other things in the space, you got to
be nimble.
Really,
you gotta
really
what do you guys recommend for
adapt.
someone? This is a dangerous question, but for options trading in general, like what platform are you guys using, or which one do you recommend? Like
It's in TD Ameritrade for stocks.
It doesn't matter. They're all pretty much
market.
the same. They're going to use the same order book. That's like driven by Citadel in TradFi.
But in crypto.
Yeah, Stephen, how did you implement these shorts? Did you borrow against them and sell them to stables, or like how are you implementing the actual trade?
I have some international accounts.
FTX.com, the .com version.
Please don't dox me.
I wanted to contribute some money and actually trade on your account.
Killing me. But yeah, I use perpetual futures, perps, which I really don't recommend to people unless you know what you're doing, because you can just get so wrecked. But I'm not really selling any of my ETH. I'm basically using the ETH in my account as collateral, right? So if I have, say, like $100,000 of ETH for like a round number, right? And I don't want to be long that much in this environment. Well, I could put on $100,000 short of a basket of really crappy coins that I think are just going to bleed out, and that will reduce my exposure. It'll probably make me actually net short because those coins are likely to go down a lot more than ETH is. Couple things you got to be careful though is the leverage, right? But in theory, if you're shorting, you're making money when the coin's going down, right? So if your collateral's going down, in theory, your position's going down more. So you should be okay. And the other thing you got to worry about with perps is the funding rate. So you could be, if you're not paying attention, paying 190% a year in an interest rate to short that coin that seems like a gimme to go down, and then you could actually not make any money when the dust settles. I think a simpler thing for people to do if they want to take like a longer term trade, and might be a little late in the cycle to do this, but if you would put your ETH on Aave and borrowed a couple of these crappy coins like Engine and Sushi and Uniswap, and make like all these down only coins and just sort of sell them, right? And then just redeposit your stable coins for collateral. That's a good example of how to keep your existing position, but then put on like a different position that's going to kind of appreciate, and this is especially important for somebody like me because I don't have like a quote unquote job with a salary. So if the market is going down, like this gives me a way to get cash flow without having to sell assets. So I kind of win whether we go up or go down.
What vehicles are you using? Shit perp or?
No, the funding's really bad on those. I've been short Harmony One and Engine and Kronos, but Harmony One, like basically all of these L1s I think are just going to die, except maybe we'll see a revival from Solana or AVAX, in the next run for a bit. But I think there's a lot of these alt L1s that are just, I think Harmony is especially dead on arrival.
It's all going to consolidate.
I've been looking at these a lot, and it seems to me like all of these are just going to kind of retrace to their 2021 like year opens, which is still like another 70% from here. Mm-hmm. So I think there's still a lot of juice in the trade, but I think we're going to get like a huge kind of relief rally at some point. That's the main reason I haven't been putting on like a large trade, is I don't want to put on like a huge position and then we get one of these relief rallies and I get liquidated. But
So some of those sound like they could be a good transition toward mistakes or learning. So
Yep.
if you don't mind, I'll transition there, and I'll just kind of end with my alfalfa for basically this week was what the fuck was it? At this point, that's what it was. I wanted to talk about that. I just wanted to mention, like, haven't made any like actual trading moves this week, but the biggest thing that I've gotten out of going to permissionless really is ultimately this market, this time, this cycle is an incredible time to learn and to build. And I know that's not exactly what we're supposed to do in this round, and it's supposed to be focused on like actual trades I made, but that really is the biggest insight and the biggest alpha that I've come across lately. And every time I've talked to people here at this conference, any crypto conference, I think previous ones were the same, about things that I am building or want to build or want to do, there's just an immediate influx of support. And, you know, this space is a very harmonious, mostly on the most part. There's definitely aspects of toxicity, but overall it's one in which, you know, there's a WAGMI culture, right? And WAGMI meaning we're all going to make it. And that is an abundant mindset that exists in the space as a whole. I think that saying and that acronym is really significant. And again, I think people want to see people succeed, and they want to celebrate success. And they know that if you build something of value, it's only going to make the whole space more successful and functional. And even today, for example, there was, you know, a great talk I was mentioning to you guys on Web3 social media, just talking about that future of what it looked like was really exciting. So to think like just how much promise there is and opportunity there is in social media for Web3 is really exciting. And there's plenty of people out there that are like, man, I could create a better social media onboarding on-ramp tool for social sign-in the way that Web2 did it, but I'm going to do it for Web3. Cool. Amazing. Those are all opportunities that exist. So get to building, because it's going to be, I don't know. We'll see if it's going to be a 12 to 18 month thing or a 6 month thing, like Raoul Paul was saying, and it's going to be more condensed. But either way, we have time, and we need to build and we need to learn. So that's my alpha. Let's switch gears into mistakes. So to set the stage a little bit for the listener, the idea here is that obviously we're kind of at the end of an incredible bull run, and it's a good time to do a bit of a retrospective, a little bit of a post-mortem, and think about what we did well, what we would do differently, in particular when it comes to crypto, because that's what we're mostly talking about here, and identify the patterns where we realize in hindsight that was a mistake, that we fell into some sort of trap, some sort of cognitive miscalculation and failure, and potentially even a bias, and that we hope to not repeat that. And as a process of actually, I think, sharing that here with each other, I think ideally we get smarter, we get better as investors, but also the listeners are like, cool, if I learn from others, that's great wisdom in that. So there's plenty of mistakes. I'm curious what some of the ones you guys have had, whether they're crypto or not, by the way. I think that they can apply as general rules to decision making, because that's ultimately what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, I mean, I guess I can jump in and start. I think first might be good to just zoom out a bit for me, because a lot of what I'm doing now is actually a result of some of my mistakes in the previous bull market. So I'm simultaneously evaluating the things I screwed up this time while fixing some of the stuff that is actionable from before. And what I screwed up last time was getting bored and walking away. Now, I managed to get back in just in time and caught a really good wave still, right? But I missed a lot of those kind of early DeFi 1000x type plays, because I just got so bored and disinterested with price not going anywhere that I left, right? So this time around, I'm going to be doing a lot more, staying in the game and researching and learning for sure. I think this past recent bull market, my biggest mistake was it with regard to execution. I had really good thoughts. I had really good plans. I didn't really put them down in writing, and I really overestimated how good my decision making would sort of be in the heat of the moment. And it turns out that when things are happening and you're either feeling fear or euphoria and some type of adrenaline is pumping, as good as you might think you are, you do start making decisions from, emotion instead of the brain, and your judgment gets a little clouded. Then when the dust settles, sometimes you're like, wait, what the heck? Why did I do that? So I'm going to make sure that every trade I go into next cycle, I'm going to have a reason why I'm in. I'm going to have exactly what I'm looking for, and when I'm looking to get out, and how I'm going to get out, if that is the case that I want to get out. And I'm going to.
So Stephen, your safeguard, the way that you guarantee that you take this action, is it as simple as writing things down? What do you think guarantees? Is it talking to us about it? Is it like, what's the system that actually guarantees that action, that outcome going forward?
So even recently, I've been publishing a lot of Twitter threads, right, and even doing stuff out on my computer that you don't see. And I've been using Notion a lot because I can kind of write all these detailed notes and screenshot, charts, and kind of write my thoughts in real time, and my plan of action in advance, when I'm going to enter, when I'm going to exit, and more importantly, like why I'm doing that, and what will happen to invalidate that sort of thinking. And it's been really useful. I mean, I can feel it giving me a lot of clarity. There was a time where I was definitely just kind of sitting here. You get in those phases, right, where there's so many thoughts that you just are spinning the tires in your head, and you're expending all this energy, and you're not really going anywhere because there's just too much going on. So a combination of talking to you guys, writing it down, and I want to start blogging and that sort of thing too, especially putting out some more like high level theses for like what's going to happen for the rest of this bear and what we might see in the next bull, to really start kind of laying the framework for the high level stuff. Yeah. And then to maybe start drilling down from there, because everything kind of flows top down from the big theses to the small. I'm going to be writing something, I think.
Are you teasing a potential newsletter, a Substack, a review? Yeah.
Yeah. I've got a Bitcoin post in the works that I hope to be releasing at some point.
What does that mean? A Bitcoin host?
A Bitcoin post?
Oh, post.
Nice. I'm contemplating selling the remainder of my Bitcoin stack.
Oh,
already ahead of you, pal. Already ahead of you. I'm out.
I know this is like in vogue around here, but
you guys are nuts.
I'm putting my thoughts to paper and making sure my thinking's pretty crystal clear before that happens. But I definitely have some interesting things I've been thinking about.
What people find bullish about it is going to be its downfall. I mean, these halvenings are going to make it so that there's no security on the chain. There's no transaction volume to support, zero issuance.
I think that's maybe a problem. I'm actually not so sure that that's the problem. A, because it's so far out in the future that we're all going to be dead, and B, like it's just sort of either going to make it as a global monetary network or not. The fees, no, it's long time. I think the larger issue I'm worried about with Bitcoin, not to get too in the weeds, is that I'm wondering we have commodity cycles, right? We have these 1.5 long periods where like copper just goes nuts and commodities just go up and then they go down, right? I'm kind of worried that Bitcoin might fall into that thing, and everybody has a very short time horizon as far as investment goes, right? We've been through 14 years of Bitcoin, so it's just like, oh, it's tested, it just goes up all the time, but it's never been tested in an environment where the liquidity is going away. It's never lived through a decreasing liquidity period, and it's never lived through a period where it's having a drawdown while the larger global equity markets are drawing down. I worry that it was too much just sort of like the best like sink for liquidity, and in the next sort of paradigm we're going into, there's going to be other things sucking that liquidity that remains, right? For example, oil, energy, stuff like that. Like people are going to be spending money on those things, right? And I think that we may be entering into like a new paradigm of like commodities and like utility, right? And there isn't utility for Bitcoin yet. I think there is this kind of like longer term, time horizon where this thesis could still play out. But when I'm looking at ETH, I'm sort of seeing both a commodity and I do see utility there. And it's just like
I have so many questions
to me.
This deserves a full 2 hours.
This might be a fun thing to. This might be a really fun thing to actually talk about at some point, because I think this could easily be like a very long thing, and I don't want to do
really good
too much.
No,
I'm gonna put some more pen to paper and see where this is. Just kind of a thing I was thinking about in the shower.
Biggest mistake is Steven not having a Substack. Would subscribe. All right, so you're bringing, which by the way, the cool thing about Revue, REVUE, is it integrates into your Twitter. And since you're doing all that Twitter stuff, you can have you guys seen that? The one-click subscribe in people's Twitter bios. That's with like a Substack competitor. Yeah. And it's really cool. Highly recommend. So would subscribe. Sweet. Okay, so on the thread of mistakes, I think we should discuss some more. What do you guys got?
The non-crypto related one. I mean, there's so many to choose from, but I kind of harken back to when I first started having enough money to actually start investing. And man, did I light some money on fire. And I was kind of, when we proposed a topic, I thought back to what are the lessons from it? And so I first started, making some extra money and decided, okay, time to put this money to work. And at the time I had maybe a basket of 5 to 8 stocks that I was kind of managing myself at the time. And it did well for a little period, but it's also difficult to actively manage while you're running a business. It's hard to create an advantage in that environment. So that was one. But then I started, talking to investment advisors. And I just kind of talked to the first 2 I found, didn't do a vetting process or talk to other people. And I realized I was asking the wrong questions. So I was going and asking them what are some good investments? And so I got some answers, obviously, quick, had done. And I had just kind of finally started putting these in investments. And I did them without a framework and knowing, kind of what my defined goals were, what were my personal liquidity needs and over what timeframes. And I think, the lesson there was I should have been asking different questions. When you first enter into that next stage where, okay, you're making money and you have money to invest, the question isn't what investment should I make? It's, what investment approach should I take over my lifetime as a younger person who just made some money? What approach should I take? And I didn't, ask enough people. So after that happened, I did start going to an aspirational group of people who had multiple orders of magnitude more wealth than I did. And I talked to a lot of them and I started asking them, what was your approach? And I started thinking of what are my goals and frameworks, and thinking in terms of appreciation and income goals over my lifetime, and which time frames of my life growth would be more important, which would income be more important. And so that's when I started to unlock a framework and a model, and then feeding investments through that model. So I guess the lesson I learned was, go find an aspirational group that's already achieved what you achieved. Talk to 5, 6, 7 people. And I quickly landed on real estate, and I had talked to people who had rented out single family homes and duplexes. I talked to people who had done short-term rentals, Airbnb investments. I talked to people who did apartment complexes. And we talked about a few podcasts ago, I ended up in multifamily investments quite a bit. And that's what kind of landed me in a better place. But those first few mistakes, looking back to how much those could have compounded, pretty painful to think about. So I think that was my big lesson, asking the right questions initially when you kind of have that money to invest in, and make sure you're asking enough aspirational people the right questions of what's the right approach over a lifetime. And, you definitely get a lot of good feedback, a lot of willing people when you ask the right questions, and you're just trying to learn. So that's my kind of hope for people to take.
It's funny because that gives so much context to something, that it was mentioned when your seat was empty, good sir, last week. one thing we said in the last episode was like, what a great framework you have and how organized you are in terms of staying true to that framework and providing yourself transparency to where you're constantly at with your spreadsheets and analysis of your portfolio. And like that just gives so much context to it in terms of like how you got there. And it's so true. Like the hardest part is actually creating some sort of like intentional framework and investment thesis and sticking to it. Actually, the second hardest part is sticking to it. The first part is most people don't even bother finding one, creating one in the first place. But so many people create one and have one and then never stick to it. So that's like, I guess, the next hardest problem.
For sure, rooted in pain, most definitely. But also the framework turns into a thesis, and a thesis constantly evolves. And if you start, earlier in life rather than later, that thesis can course correct if as you learn. And luckily made some mistakes early on, and still make some mistakes, but at least the framework provides guidance. I think is really important. Back to Steven's point about like writing it down, like putting in Excel or like a narrative in Word document where you write it to yourself is super important. And it's tough to find clarity of thought. If you don't write it down. When you write it down, you're forced to find clarity in your thoughts. And I know a lot of you guys are really good at it. And Armand, you write a lot, and I know you find a lot of clarity in writing yourself. So yeah, for sure.
Big time. Like I write to discover what I know and what I want in the first place. Which is so interesting. And to your point, Nick, like, people are often wondering like, well, what is my framework? Where I just pull it out of my ass? Like, where do I come up with like an investment thesis in the first place? So to give some color, since I know you so well, like you started with your values. Your value is freedom. You want the ability to get checks in the mail and not work for them actively. And so passive income is the outcome. And then you work backwards and you say, what vehicles are going to get me there? Okay, interesting. Apartment complexes, real estate. Okay, what does that do? What does that provide? How does that compare to these other options of crypto and stonks and choosing individual stonks and options trading? And you do enough analysis, you say, okay, I need this much toward that, this much toward that, and you come up with some kind of framework. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle. That's why I bring that up. Begin with the end in mind. Begin with the outcome. Have some kind of goal. Eric, you're obviously very, very similar, and I think you have a very similar goal as well, but you tend to approach it differently. Yeah, I'm curious, like your mistakes, man, and things you would talk about here and give color to.
Well, I think you do this for long enough, you get a lot of mistakes to draw upon, and there's a lot of money lost along the way. I think like I could pick any number, but where I begin to think about it is like, are these mistakes of commission or errors of omission? These are like mistakes that you like take action and you make a mistake, or are these mistakes that you make by not taking action? And I think the biggest mistakes that I have made over my career are like errors of omission, of like not acting. And that's like on both the upside and the downside. But the one that I want to focus on that has like the most impact on my life, it's not the biggest dollar amount I've lost, but it's the most impact on my life, is going back to the .com boom and bust. That's when I like first sort of like dipped my toes into investing. My grandfather gave me a couple $1,000s to invest when I was like 14 years old, and I got started back in .com boom, and I quickly ran that portfolio up to like 20K. And for like a 14-year-old, I felt like I was hot shit, man. I was like day trading and during fucking recess, like and lunch breaks and shit. I thought I was hot shit. And then the .com bubble burst, and all those things that I was invested in or like trading pretty much went to zero. I mean, those were like shit stonks before the term even existed. I won't even get into the actual names because nobody knows what this stuff is. But that 20K that I had built up like went down to almost zero. And I fancied myself at the time, not only like hot shit, but I also had this ideology of being like a long-term holder, because that's what I was always taught. And what I learned in that process is like, don't own a bunch of shit stonks. make sure you own good assets. But B, like you don't have to just hold all the way to fucking zero just because you fancy yourself a long-term investor. And I'm taking a lot of these like lessons, even stuff we talked about, like stuff that Steven mentioned on the last episode was very valuable. I like went and even did some of these exercises, like writing down my thesis, writing down my strategy. If this thesis plays out, like what is a good investment strategy? So it's like trying to help you execute the trades and actually make money if your thesis is right. But like, I think back then I didn't know how to hedge. And in our Alfalfa round, like Nick and I talked about how we're like implementing hedges on the way down now. Like this period right now feels so similar to that 2001 time where like there was like this real exuberance around this new technology. It was internet at the time. Now it's crypto. Valuations became irrational. That's also like what we're seeing today. And, there's things that I want to hold forever, like ETH, but you don't have to just like raw dog it and just go long forever. Like you can hedge that away, like hedge the downside. And that's something I think I've done a much better job of this time around, I guess, learning from experience.
Can I interject something there that I found useful? So, also don't raw dog, but
sorry, I'm still on the raw dog. I can't get past the raw dog. It just takes me right back to SDSU. That's where I first
very fratty.
Very fratty.
Thank God for penicillin. So let's say you you got your thesis written down about what you think will play out, and I found the question, a certain question, helpful when to change course, and that is when you write your thesis, ask yourself, what do I need to see change in order for my view to change? Like what needs to change in order for this view to change? And I ask that a lot of people when they present a very opinionated view about something. I'm like, well, what would you need to see in order for that to change? And if they can't come up with anything that, well, nothing will need to change for my view to change, then you might think they're maybe a little on tilt, or maybe it's not built on a strong foundation. And so maybe that's a good question to ask ourselves when we write the thesis, like what would need to change for my thesis to change?
So just very good question,
interjection on that.
No. That's really, really good stuff. What would need to change for my thesis to change? Because most people think that when they have conviction, that's enough, and that their job from that point forward is actually to maintain that conviction. But if they don't allow for that conviction to be broken, and it has to be for a specific reason, then they're going to be blindly just following something that they decided 5-10 years ago for no reason. So that's super.
That's good. Can I add one more thing too?
Yeah.
Another thing I did, I reached out to an old mentor of mine after our last episode, because I had like multiple theses. I had multiple theses, and he was saying like, don't focus so hard on these like hard questions on like what exactly is going to play out. Like focus more on what to invest in under different scenarios. So like I'm having multiple theses written down and saying like, okay, so if this one plays out this way, how do I want to strategize? How do I want to play it? And I have multiple of those going on.
That makes sense. When you can't predict the economy, but you can view everything in terms of probabilities, and everything is probabilistic. So it makes sense. I like that.
Well, wrap up here with some mistakes, and I'm going to keep them short because I'm actually really excited to get into this Ministry of Truth talk with you guys. This very controversial topic. People seem to really like the controversial topics with us. Did you guys know our abortion episode I think it's our most listened to episode so far? I don't know if you guys saw that.
It was my favorite episode. It was a great one. I'm glad it's our most listened to.
Yeah, it was different, right? I don't think people can access that kind of conversation. I mean, that's why I titled it like rare, rational, conversation. But so here we go. My main mistakes. I've thought about so many different ways of framing this. a lot of it, obviously, my mistakes are very subjective. They have to do with the time that I entered the market, how I entered the market, what I began accumulating at the time that I entered the market, and then the actions of commission or omission that I love that framework, Eric, that I made. And I was kind of looking at mine through your framework. I realized half of them were actions I took and half of them were actions I didn't take. And so in particular, one of the most rewarding and yet challenging things that I experienced in this cycle was getting into NFTs too late. I remember when Nick was talking to me about began punks. What's the
mint? My first mint
man.
ever.
So I didn't mint and I didn't take action because I didn't feel like setting up a fucking MetaMask. Like,
Lucky for you.
what a loser. Like, well, no, but the fact that I wasn't there to learn early enough was a hugely detrimental omission of act, like that not following that wave with like a few of you other guys put me in a position of catch up in NFTs. And when you're riding that wave a little bit too late, we talked about this in multiple episodes, so I don't want to be too repetitive, but like you think that you're cruising along and you're riding the wave and you're extracting maximum value, but you're not. You're playing catch up and you're the exit liquidity for everybody else.
Right.
And that
2
hurt.
weeks after Begans was Bored Ape Yacht Club. So
can we just talk about like how like I love that that's your biggest mistake. My biggest mistake is minting Began punks instead of Bored Apes.
Oh god.
Yeah, 2 weeks early, bro.
Oh man.
Well, no, I get it. So, it is this meta mistake of just generally, if you're going to enter the market when the euphoria is already high and you're chasing new NFTs, generally where I missed out, where I fucked up was I chased NFTs post mint. And what I did not understand in terms of the meta game at the time was that these were just pump and dump NFT mints. These were worthless, garbage, JPEG mints for profile pictures. And most of the time, not the Began one, but most of the time, these were created to extract maximum value in dollars from the mint itself. And the people behind the scenes that were able to participate in that just dumped, got their, initial principal investment back, and people like me were paying for it. Now, in the end, I'm way up on NFTs, but I still think that was a mistake. I don't want to be that guy that says, well, I made like 3 good bets and 27 bad ones. It's not quite that ratio, but that's not what I want to see going forward next cycle. Are you guys experiencing any audio issue? I'm hearing some weird shit on my end.
Yeah, it's kind of choppy for me a little bit, but
my voice is
fine to
or
me.
Okay.
No,
Let's keep going.
it's kind of whatever. But
Okay. So also just generally as part of that, I think over allocating to NFTs, that was something that I think we all did and we all talked about. In particular,
nuts, bro.
Eric and I, though, like really talked about how we need to get out and fix the overall allocation. I think over allocating to something that I kind of went into trader mode. I kind of went into because I had like these handful of winners, and I was like, well, I might as well like break some rules for my framework and like participate in this bull run. And I still don't quite know. I haven't done like a proper post-mortem to like figure out like, well, what are the rules that can be bent during the different cycles? Because there does need to be some flexibility, because I am, 35, 36 years old now. And I want to be able to participate in things like that. And so I want to still maintain a framework. And maybe that just needs to be part of the framework. Maybe it needs to be a rule within the framework where I'm allowed to do X, Y, and Z to a certain degree in these events, something like that. But I think my biggest mistake by far was just not taking enough profits. I wish I had taken more profits along the way. I was airdropped multiple tokens that I wish I had swapped at the time, NFTs that I was airdropped, things that I was whitelisted or allow listed for that I should have just sold right after they were given to me. And I probably would be up another, I don't know, 50 ETH from that alone, but I didn't. So, and last but not least, the one that I think about least, but I think is the most important, is I didn't bet hard enough on my highest conviction assets. So some of those in particular, oh my God, after listening to Elon on All In a few days ago, just so bullish on Tesla again. Like I know I'm a fanboy level, but like I am so bullish on Tesla. It's like 19 companies in one, and he barely scratched the surface of like how incredible that company is. So
for the listeners, the deep breathing is coming from Steven's microphone.
Yeah, what is that?
I'm on mute, but in my mind I was like wrecked.
All I'm thinking in my head is exit pump. Pump.
Oh wait, so ETH, and one of my other favorite stocks of all time, Nvidia. I think like I just wish I'd gone harder on some of these like high conviction assets. So let's switch gears. Let's talk about the Ministry of Truth. Joe Biden. Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. And his Department of Homeland Security's Disinformation Governance Board. So this has been one of the big topics in the news now for quite a while. And for those people that don't know, I think we should give a very basic overview, but the Department of Homeland Security created a new little disinformation governance board. The mission of that board was a little bit foggy and unclear, to which they agreed and admitted to. But the idea was to eliminate propaganda that as they saw. So Nick, why don't you give your
I think the original like stated goal was to combat disinformation around some specific topics. They mentioned like immigration, around elections and whatnot. And I think COVID-19, and it was a like disastrous rollout. I mean, they got this Orwellian name, utter lack of detail, and the timing was like could not have been worse. So they roll out this disinformation governance board at the same time Elon's talking about free speech and about to go on his rating of Twitter. And so with that backdrop, they unleash this government like oriented and organized way of telling what's true and what's not. And then on top of that, they add a disinformation czar that had like made public partisan statements prior to her being appointed. And so all that wrapped up, I mean, the quick, references to George Orwell's 1984 just came out. The Ministry of Truth is actually in the book 1984. And it was like, this group that determined what was true and what was false, and often rewrite history to whatever the narrative of the day was. So yeah, that was what happened. That was its stated goal without the detail, and just terrible rollout. And yeah, there's plenty to go on
Nick,
from here.
Like,
but it's
what was the actual name of this thing, by the way?
Disinformation. That's what it is. Disinformation Governance Board.
Right.
So Nick, do you think
only
that
slightly S Orwellian than the real name?
Yeah, exactly. Do you think, Nick, that something like this was needed and could be necessary and or effective? Do you see a world at all where something like this is necessary? Say it was rolled out properly, say the manifesto was more clear, say the timing was better. Is there a role that the Department of Homeland Security or the government should be playing with this in any world that you imagine?
Let's state the obvious that they're classifying this era as the era of misinformation, but that has always been true. And it's because there's new communication technologies, Twitter, social media, faster pace of communication, and so there's new ways of information to be spread, and that has always existed. I think when they were going to like create the cross Atlantic, telegraph, they were worried that like information was going to flow too fast. And people often, resort to the censor button really quickly when there's these new technologies and new ways of communicating. And misinformation has always existed in multiple areas of communication, because that's kind of inherent to, I think, like the human species. So I think that's one. And I just kind of get like confused on how a lot of the default is for people to give the power or the decision-making power more to government, give them more budget and have them solve the problem. When, in America, people should have the ability to decide what they think is right. They should have the freedom to be wrong. They should have a freedom to be an asshole and not face any kind of retribution specifically from any kind of government entity. I looked up a stat that I thought was pretty interesting. And I was like, okay, this is an instance of, the government trying to decide what is right and what is wrong. And so I actually looked up false positives on death penalty, because that is the most like important, crucial decision a government, organization can make, and particularly like, judges in the legal system. And it turns out that for every 8.3 people that have been put to death in the US since executions resumed in the 1970s, there's been one person who's been wrongfully convicted and sentenced to death.
That's so fucked
okay.
up.
So we're talking about freedom of speech and just what people's thoughts are on COVID and immigration and whatnot. But when you really hone in on something so critical as to like, do we put this person to death or not?
Playing God.
Government organizations are not able to be fully accurate. There's over a 10% defect rate. And so when you compare that, I don't know if a government organization is the right way to kind of weight that decision-making power inside
By
of.
the way, by the way, that's after
interesting.
going through our entire judicial process, which is very intense. There are checks and balances on it that would never exist with a Ministry of Truth, Disinformation Governance Board. They would just say what they say. And the funniest thing,
still can't get it right.
Yeah, you still can't get it right.
And I'll, my kind of last point on this is like, when you give government power, let's say they are trying to be objective, they have true intentions, but government organizations, they have multiple administration turnovers. They have expanding budgets, they have decreasing budgets, they have scope creep, they have different priorities of the time. And that power could easily morph and be justified to do something far from its original intention. And so that's where I get always suspicious of like, is the answer to give more power to government rather than, let people decide and assume that, the population is not as stupid as it seems.
Okay, so that's good, because I think like where I'm at is I don't want to focus so much on the government initiative on it. It's like, I want to ask you guys, and maybe you don't need to answer right now, but think about it. Like, how do you even filter for truth as a human being, right? And I imagine that you all consider yourselves like above median in terms of ability to do this as a human being. But like, how do you filter? And then, thinking about the future or even the now, it's like, it's becoming like an imperative skill to be able to identify, like parse out truth from bullshit, right? Because bullshit's everywhere. How do you do it yourself? And then like understanding that it is a fucking tough task. Maybe the government isn't the answer, like having some government solution, but like there needs to be a solution, like for a person to be able to like determine what's real and what's not. And it's hard, and it's going to get harder and harder because like pretty soon we're going to be able to deep fake everything. We're going to be able to like visually fake anything that we want to. So you can't trust your eyes anymore. What are you going to fucking trust? It's actually a hard question.
It is. I like Vitalik's perspective on this. I sent you guys his tweet thread. I'm sure you guys have seen it, but one of the points that he made was that he basically had this tweet thread of contradictions in his life, right? And one of the contradictions was my contradiction between my love for things like decentralization and democracy, and my realization that in practice, I agree with intellectual elites more than, quote, the people on many, though definitely far from all, specific policy issues. What a fascinating thing. I think my filter oftentimes is also the intellectual elite. We talked about this. Nick mentioned this, that his filter for information and news, right, specifically is us, each other, the people that he trusts to disseminate and provide that and filter that information to him. Give people access to the information. Let them decide for themselves what truth is at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, after that, yes, the mob and the people are going to have the power to determine and create the change that they need to make. But in the type of democracy that we live in, at the end of the day, we're putting people in charge to make good decisions for us. And we have to make sure our voices are heard. But that doesn't mean that they should take away our right to determine what is what in the first place. So this whole concept of like, I am here, big brother, the government, to do the hard work for you of determining what is true. From the moment it starts, it's going to fail. I think there's a lot to discuss within this, and I'm sure, Stephen, there's so many things within even the article we were reading earlier today that stood out to you. The Washington Post put out this one. I mean, I never read like these types of like media outlet articles, but it was absolutely terrible and full of contradictions. But like one of the things that was in there was just this idea that I thought was partly true that I just want to address, that when this Disinformation Governance Board was announced, the journalist argued that the far right, that the right took this idea and ran with it, and that they have a playbook, and that their playbook is to dramatize and to pick out and parse out things and exaggerate them and distract and turn things into a mockery and turn things into memes. And that's actually pretty true. like yes, like that's true. That is like the playbook in so many ways. And yes, the right does like exaggerate things and go to the most extreme version of what they might look like. And we can dig into that. But for me, this actually was like, in so many ways, a victory for democracy. Maybe that is a strong statement, but I think that if the people were able to provide enough of a response that made a government organization realize that they don't want to admit it, but maybe this was a mistake in the first place, and they paused. And now, as of today, as the time we're recording this on May 18th, they literally did pause and fully, I think, Nick, you said they fully they're
going to go into review from two former DHS officials from both parties and review it, but you can call it done for.
Call it done. The fact that happened in response to social media, the people, and by the way, they call it that the far right is doing this. It's obviously not true. We joke about this. If you ain't left, you're far right. I think it's kind of like a victory. I like it. I think it's cool.
This is going to be like a Kobe Shaq alley-oop from Armand to Steven. I want to see. I want to see what happens next.
Bring it, Shaq.
Dunk it home, Shaq.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like,
let it rip.
I never took.
Let it rip, Lord.
I never took this thing that seriously. It was almost just like so fucking stupid from the get-go that you just knew it was going to collapse into just this flaming pile of wreckage. And this girl was like literally on TikTok singing like Mary Poppins songs about disinformation. And meanwhile, all her tweets are still up about like the Hunter Biden laptop being like Russian propaganda. It's just like, it's almost like you can't even script this stuff. It's so stupid. And who wrote that article? Taylor Lorenz.
Yep.
I'm like befuddled that there are people in the world who like read things Taylor Lorenz writes like unironically, like who think that anything she says is useless. It's like I can't think of like a more like vapid, useless journalist in existence. And the funny part about reading that article was it was just like it was just completely lacking in self-awareness. You know, she was like outlining this playbook that quote unquote the far right uses for everything, as she wrote, like, one of these other experts say, oh, far right trolls are doing this, blah 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 blah, harassing women. It's like the same thing with everything they do, right? It's a playbook. And I don't know, I think, God, I think the Democrats are just going to get absolutely shellacked for the next like 2 or 3. Like, I just saw, I don't know if you guys saw this. Did you see Elon tweeted? He's like voting Republican now.
He's never voted Republican before. And he, by the way, I have to say, I think he's one of us. I think he's a radical moderate. He actually said that.
He's clearly a moderate. He's
Yeah.
all over the place. He's got some like
pragmatist.
libertarian tendencies, right? Like the problem is, like, this party is they're just they're putting like normal people they're putting a gun to their head, and they're like, are you with us or are you with like the far right Nazis on like every issue? And it doesn't even make sense. And I think a lot of people are just collectively just going like, you know, just fuck you and all of the people who like uphold you and write about this stuff. It's nonsense. So there's a real disconnect I'm observing now from like what everybody around me like actually thinks about stuff, and then what is sort of broadcast on Twitter and like what the government puts out there. Like it really is telling like how disconnected they are from reality, that they would put out something like this and think it was not going to be. It's
massive disconnect, man.
Couldn't absolutely agree more. Mind-blowing. I mean,
you talk to somebody at the bar or in the airport next to you in the airplane. Why aren't they repeating the same shit that you read in the Washington Post in these articles? It's a massive disconnect. I just don't see enough people that feel that way anymore.
Do you guys think it should be a free market? Let the free market decide what's true and what's not, and let the individuals sort of like collectively build truth.
Yes.
That's your idea.
It's like a last ditch effort. It's like a last ditch effort to control speech.
You can hold two things true at the same time. One, that there is disinformation. It is an issue. It is a problem. It exists. It does influence people to make potentially unintended decisions. And at the same time, you could hold it to be true that a government institution is not the solution to solve the disinformation problem. And you're not radical either way for holding those two truths at the same time.
Yeah. Dude.
And
how do you get to the root of it? What's the root? What is really the way to get to the root of disinformation?
I mean, we've talked about that, like, you know, you use your social circle as a filter, but also like understand the incentives of the person who is, you know, disseminating the information. We talked about in previous podcasts as well. And then go back to like, you know, middle school, like when you have to do a book report, there are primary sources and secondary sources, and try to dig into primary sources as much as possible. And, you know, don't go full tilt on emotion. You know, a lot of people start off with like a viewpoint and then look for information to back that viewpoint. But if you can be truly curious about something in the hunt for real truth about it, at least for your, you know, perspective, you know, you can actually find truth, and it'll be somewhere in the middle, likely.
I'll just play devil's advocate. I think the hard thing is that like most of us don't care about most things, right? We only have bandwidth to care about a few things. And like be curious enough about each one of those individual things. So then like you're going to get, for most things, you're going to get just like shit info for most of it. Right. And you're just going to take the thing that you hear the most. Like you're going to get like, you know, the seven most prominent things you heard about some topic that you don't give a shit about. You're going to take that as truth, I guess.
And that's fine, but don't take the next step and just, you know, copy pasta a viewpoint for the virtue signaling. Sit this one out and understand that like I don't have the curiosity or the, you know, will to like really dig in this subject. So sit it out and just be aware that like I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. Right. You know.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the problem is that like isn't so much that people don't know things; it's that they like lack the humility to just say that they don't know things, or they go even the complete opposite direction and they're like very assured of the things that they know, even though they don't know anything. We have this problem in crypto too, right? Like if you look at the most followed people in crypto, they're complete morons. They're complete absolute like YouTube moonboy engagement farming fraudsters, right? And it's just because like what works well on the algorithms for distribution and engagement is not like nuanced middle ground like thinking on topic, right? It's rah 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 cheerleading. It's like engagement farming, clickbaiting, or it's like, you know, demonizing of some other thing and fear mongering,
hot
right?
takes. Yeah.
Yeah. And like none of those things are useful for evaluating whether or not like a coin that you buy is going to go to zero, right? And they're also not useful for like building your framework of like the political and cultural landscape of the world. And I don't think this is that difficult for people. Like I think you just have to force yourself to just listen to completely opposing viewpoints. Like if you went through my podcast feed, you would think I was like a schizophrenic. I have, you know, quite the collection of stuff on there from all over the place, because I don't know. I think it's an interesting exercise to take something that you're very, very sure of and then just like hear the opposite side of it, right? It's like, you know, our discussion a couple of weeks ago is a great example of that. I never thought I would be on a podcast offering some, you know, devil's advocate take on Roe v. Wade, but that was just like a product of me being like, I don't know what is the counter argument to this to make any sense. And sometimes when you do that, you're like, oh, I never thought of that. That's why so many of my views have shifted a lot over the years. But I don't know, it can be uncomfortable for people to challenge something that's really at the core of who they are, especially once people like really, it's difficult once you identify with the idea, because then you're sort of done, right? Because then you're challenging your whole identity. Whereas if you maintain like a healthy distance and skepticism from stuff, which is what we're all taught in high school with the scientific method and everything, right? But I don't know, it seems like we just threw all that out. And now we just hear things, we're like, that's truth. And then we latch onto it and we get very, very sure of it. And we don't do any testing or investigation, you know?
This is kind of random, but thank God for art and movies and books and things like 1984 from people like George Orwell, because when they create the example of what the reality could look like and then put words to the ideas itself, it provides people a framework to not let perhaps history repeat itself, to prevent certain terrible dystopian outcomes from even occurring in the first place. So the thing that the right was chastised for and like really beaten up for when this all happened is that, they immediately pointed to the most exaggerated worst case scenario of what this could look like. And they're labeling it the Ministry of Truth from this terrible book. But actually, if that didn't exist, we would have had, when I say we, I mean, like, I think the majority of people, not the right, just the majority of people. That's why this thing fell apart. It was just a joke from the first place. Democracy succeeded because that example existed in the first place for people to be able to say, look, this is the shit you're asking for. This is what it's going to look like. The words are even similar. The tone is even similar. This is all a joke. I mean, it's absolutely wild. There was this funny piece, and again, I didn't even know who this fucking journalist was, but it was, as I said, one of the worst articles I've ever read. Look at the level of contradiction in this one piece. Right? Tell me if I'm misunderstanding this, but this is like a joke to me. The board was created to study the best practices in combating the harmful effects of disinformation. Okay. And like, it goes on to say that, in fact, the board itself had no power or authority to declare what is true or false, or to compel anybody to do anything. You just said the same thing, but the opposite, like at the same time. Like, you were created to determine what disinformation is, what is a lie, what is truth, what is propaganda. Even think about what is the term propaganda. So the arguments against the right, some of them are really good and some of them are true, that they tend to just get really exaggerative and hyperbolic, and they turn it into this like social media machine. But when you're not in power, and all you can rely on is your words and the power of other people to share ideas, I think that's what you have to do, because that balances the scale. If the right didn't have the ability to do so, the left would be so fucking dominant that we'd be living in an absolutely crazy world.
I mean, can I just point out why that line is so stupid? Like, because it is one of the stupider things I've seen her write, and she's written some pretty stupid things. Sorry, I don't mean to dunk on Taylor Lorenz so much. I obviously
it's okay.
Tweaks a nerve. It's like she was like designed. I think she was just designed to engagement farm, right? She's just designed so people like us, I think, get mad at her. I think like there's a lot of characters like this in the world. I almost don't even believe that they're real people. But that line in the piece that you read it basically says, hey, this government agency wasn't created to do that. It was created to do this thing one step before that, right? And it's just so dumb. Like, no government agency is like ever created and then grown and like overstepped its bounds. Like I'm old enough to remember when OSHA was tried to use to like force like mandatory vaccinations on the entire population, right? OSHA. Right. And we're like, the occupation, what is it? Occupational.
Yeah, they're for like construction and stuff.
Yeah.
Like
and the government organization, next thing you know, they're trying to force you, like everybody in the world with particular jobs, to stick a needle in their arm. Right. So this idea that because a government bureaucracy or organization is formed, then they say they're not going to do that thing. Like, the idea that it'll never grow into that is just so laughable and out of touch with the reality of how literally all of government operates, which is why it's like almost hard to take this seriously, right? It's just so stupid. It
really is. Does anyone have any final thoughts on Ministry of Truth here? I think we can go on. What a clusterfuck. Hopefully it is fully officially closed.
This whole administration is just like it's like a never-ending treasure trove of like alley-oops to dunk on. It's like unbelievable.
I do have to say, I was a little bit worried that like this thing would become a reality, and I really view it as a success that it fell apart. I think it's really cool. All right, so
they're all losing their power, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's the game. I think the jig's up. This is like the last desperate grasps of it's like that old biology, the saying, right? How about like you can have like a great product or you could have great distribution, right? And this is like a perfect example. Their product is terrible, right? What they're selling is crap and nobody wants to buy it. So they're resorting to the distribution, right? They're making it so that you have to take their ideas in and you can't get anybody else's ideas because nobody wants to buy the ideas for their own merit. And that's sort of the last step. And then it's over after that and we'll all be free, I hope.
Oh, the optimist is back. I like it. I like it. All right, guys, what have you fucked up in business?
It's a big bucket, my friend.
Almost everything.
Well, the cool thing is that you're all successful entrepreneurs. We've all done well, and yet we've made lots of mistakes. So I hope that helps people realize that first of all, mistakes are a massive part of the journey. There's more mistakes than wins always. I've made more mistakes than I can possibly count. There's just too many. But let's see what the patterns are.
Yeah, I mean, I'll throw some stuff out there just in case I have to run in a minute. But I'm sure we're all going to touch on some of the stuff people have heard a lot. But I was trying to think what I've done that's maybe interesting, but a little out there. I think a lot of my biggest mistakes in business if they've come from starting businesses for the wrong reason. I think a lot of times I started a business, I actually did it for reasons that had nothing to do with the product or even making money. Like I was just, oftentimes I was bored. I was like longing to just be a part of something or, looking for some sort of community and I got into these ideas, into these projects, mostly to kind of just fill some different void in my life that I probably should have filled first. And then obviously once things kind of got moving and like the hard times started coming, I realized I didn't actually want to be in that business for the business. I didn't even want to be in the business to make any money. I was doing something entirely wrong. So yeah, making sure my head was in the right place, doing it for the right reasons to begin with. Maybe that sounds obvious to other people, but I've done this. multiple times in my life, probably at least like 3 or 4.
I think in like a similar vein, a lot of people create businesses for non-wealth reasons, like not yours, but status is another one. To be the boss, to be in charge for status, and maybe not necessarily for community belonging, but people have made similar mistakes, for the same reasons. So it's definitely like a common pitfall, I think.
It's like a drug, right? Like when you start, right? That it's almost like you get addicted to that early stage of a business is so good. You've got like hopes and dreams and you're building something, and it's like you almost get drawn to that. And you just want to keep doing that part over and over again because it feels so good and anything is possible. But then if that was all you had, you inevitably hit the rough patch and you're like, what the hell am I doing here?
I think the old book is like the E-Myth revisited, and your comment kind of made me think of how much we, look up to entrepreneurs, but the reality is that most people shouldn't be an entrepreneur, and I think I've spoken to like entrepreneurship societies at San Jose State and other colleges and whatever, and like kind of let them know up front, like most of you shouldn't be entrepreneurs. It's not necessarily for most people the best path and the fast path to like wealth and financial independence. It's a whole different breed that is sometimes very painful, also really rewarding. But we kind of like look up to these mythical like entrepreneurs sometimes and evangelize them too much. And I think maybe that's the reason some people get into them versus like, is this actually my most efficient path to wealth? I have a mistake, kind of like a la 14-year-old Eric Johansson, that involves a little hubris from trading in the .com. So me and my business partner at the time, we're fresh off our first business. I would probably describe it as like a double or triple in baseball parlance. And we simultaneously started another business at the same time that was like maybe a single or double, both profitable and doing 8 figures a year. And then, the ugly head of hubris kind of like butted into our brains. And we decided to start a third company. Jeez. And we did not go through our normal de-risking startup process that we rigorously went through in our first 2. And we put in like 10 times the capital that we had used to start the 2 previous businesses. We brought on a team right away. We even started, I should go back and laugh at them about this, but like we started like touring office space that was like much larger before we even started the company. And we went for full software product development, like long sprint cycles, because like, hell, we couldn't miss. And for him and I, those were our first 2 businesses. So we're 2 for 2, couldn't miss. And fast forward is the full crash and burn. And it was very much lighting puke-worthy amounts of money on fire. And the company ended up doing like nominal amounts in revenue. And, luckily we had like profits in the other businesses to write off those losses against, but still like looking back, back to like even the investment losses compounded, those would have been very large amounts of money. And so, the lesson I look back on, and just so you know, like, I think a lot of you guys know this, but I keep a little vision board in my phone. It's an album on my iPhone, and I kind of transport all those vision images into a vision board. And in one of those, I keep the logo of that company in there. Just to remind me of the hubris I had and the humility I need to take on like any new venture I start, because this is like, it was a really big learning lesson for me. And is like, you need to have the rigor and scrutiny of de-risking the business as efficiently as possible. So like when you start a business, there's always these set of critical unknowns and assumptions you're making. And you have to run experiments to minimize those unknowns and assumptions as cheaply and quickly as possible. And you guys, listeners can look up several different things: theory of focused planning, discovery-driven growth, lean startup, or minimal viable product. There's lots of like reading on this method. But I think, no matter what your idea is, you have to go through that rigorous process of running experiments to run those, minimize those unknowns and assumptions as cheaply as possible. And just because, another lesson for me personally was, just because you're good at one type of business doesn't necessarily mean you're good at another. And then even learning from the failure of that business, like your learnings from a failed business are not necessarily the lessons you'll need for the next business. I think Peter Thiel in 0 to 1 talks about like all failure is bad. Like people like to grandize like, oh, failure is good, like fail often, fail a lot. But like the failure lessons in one business don't necessarily inform you what you need to do in the next business. So, you want to minimize failure at all parts. I don't think like fail often is like a good advice to most early entrepreneurs, but the main lessons, you have to go through that de-risking process, like no matter what. So you with this, you made me go through this like mini trauma again by going back in it, but it was super helpful to
I've done the same thing. That like happens. Like you have like money because you've been successful, and then you think, well, what would like what Coca-Cola do if they were launching a brand? Yeah, they'd spend money. They just obviously they hire the best people, they spend all the money, and they're all successful, right? And you kind of think that, oh, I have resources now, so I'll do that. And it seems to never work. But on the other hand, I feel like it would also be dumb to just always do things completely bootstrapped from scratch if you have some. So I guess like where do you draw the line? Like how do you balance like if you have been successful and you can spend infinite money, but you shouldn't?
Well, I mean, I think different businesses have different capital requirements, right? Like starting a blog has a different capital requirement than manufacturing PCs. And so you have to define like what is the minimum amount of capital and what's the de-risking process for the type of business you're starting, and kind of define the appropriateness based upon the business model you're starting, regardless of what your personal stack is. Because the answer may be, I need to raise money in order to de-risk this type of business. And you don't necessarily need to like put your own money in it, but it's like, okay, for this business model in this industry, what's like the minimum capital I need and how fast can I de-risk this idea? Not necessarily like how much money is in your own personal bank account.
It's almost like what I hear, Nick, from your story is like getting a little too, you call it, hubris, but just generally becoming a little too eager to skip fundamental steps. Never skip the fundamental steps. They're very important because they lay a strong foundation for the idea and for the business. And after you've done that testing, you're personally more certain, and the business scaffolding itself is more structurally sound, if I can make an analogy out of it. It just makes sense to me.
Yeah, if you're going into a new business, you have to realize you don't know anything. You know nothing about what it takes to run a new type of business. And just because you were successful in business, quote unquote, before doesn't mean you know anything. And so, that was where we faltered. And, I like I said, I have that in my little vision board to remind me that like you don't know anything, and you have to like use the scientific method in order to evaluate like if you're on the right track or not.
What are your thoughts on the sort of legal agreements that go into starting a business? Because I feel like I have screwed up both extremes of this. I've screwed up the extreme where I'm like, I trust you guys, nothing's going to happen. Let's just get to the idea and let's just start working. I've also screwed up by trying to put in place way too many things to begin with, burning a bunch of time and money, and then having to go back and change stuff anyway. And Nick, I view you as the wise business guru. Or maybe Armand, you have some insights into this as well.
No, I just think it's
where do you strike that balance?
I just think it's the same answer. It's literally the MVP of that. You have to do it, but the cheapest possible. Like Nick, I don't know, like how much
a term sheet, you Google Doc, you write some bullet points, you both sign it, and you call it a day?
No, I think you go back to like the template you had of the operating agreement you had that you spent $25,000 on one time, and then you strip it and you make it.
What about the person who's never spent $25,000 on an operating agreement?
I don't know, Nick. How would you approach it? I think it's MVP for sure. You can't skip the step. That's one of the biggest things I've learned.
Yeah, for sure. So like when you start a business, there's all kinds of like legal things that you might have to set up, terms of service, privacy policy, operating agreement, vendor agreements, things like that. To me, the most important one is the operating agreement. It's the agreement between you and your business partners on what are you going to do when this thing screws up.
Yes.
And when it doesn't go as planned, and I, luckily I haven't had any like big disputes or big issues, but even luckily, and there are business problems, but there hasn't been like operating agreement problems. And I will say, like, lean on other entrepreneurs, like, hey, do you have an operating agreement that you've used before? And I have several. So if anyone wants them, I happily, share a template in the Discord. But like,
Nick, to be fair, I just want to, you haven't had a problem because you pointed to your operating agreement in times of, right? Can you?
That's a very good point. Like, we avoided a lot of problems because there were no verbal agreements. It was like, well, our operating agreement says this. It says, like, if one person wants out of the business, this is the method we go through. If we disagree fundamentally on a critical business decision, this is the method we go through.
Capital call. This is the process. Guarantees. This is the process. Voting mechanisms. This is the process. The operating agreement is so fucking important. And and especially when you start a business with someone that you like, someone that you're friends with, someone that you have a relationship with already. I mean, practically nobody starts a business with someone they don't know, right? And oftentimes people start a business with a good friend. And so what often happens is, one of the great mistakes is, you, out of respect for the friendship, you want to prioritize the relationship. And to Steven's point, you go, well, hey man, like, we're good. We trust each other. We'll figure this out. And you read articles and you read the books and people tell you, but you need to make sure you check these items off because the inevitable often does happen. These situations do arise, and it's very difficult. The most difficult part about this, and one of the mistakes I've made, is that when you're in the excitement and euphoria of a new business, the last thing you want to think about is the business failing. Not only do you not want to think about it, you don't want to plan for it. You don't want to go into contingency, any form of contingency planning. You don't want to go into like, well, what would you even have to go into lines in your operating agreement about, like, what would happen if we not only disagree and we can't come to a vote, but after mediation, we still can't agree. Like, we got a third party involved and we still fucking hate each other and we can't agree. And you have to sit and talk to that person that you love and you care about, who's your friend, about that. And nobody wants to do this stuff. So what do? They go with very cookie cutter templates, and those cookie cutter templates end up fucking you later because you went with things that have absolutely nothing to do with your situation. So my biggest mistake is not just like it's not this like, it has to do with due diligence. It has to do with being comfortable asking difficult questions of the people that you want to work with, whether it's a joint venture or a partnership or a business partnership of co-founders or whatever it might be. In that moment of excitement and euphoria, getting really sober and having a difficult conversation about their true intentions, their wants, their needs, their desires. What do they want to put into this? How much money? How much work? How much time? For how long? And if you don't get clear on that, you might think that this person's in this deal with you for a year, but they're really only in this deal with you for a month because they have this other thing they want to go do. And that time comes and you're not going to be very happy. So I think it's due diligence and having quote unquote crucial conversations, which is the title of a great book. Crucial Conversations is imperative.
I'll give you the MVP, the shortcut of, not spending a bunch of money in an operating agreement. It's like two things that I look at. Like, one, when choosing a business partner, ask yourself, am I comfortable being business partners with this person for the rest of my life, till the day I die? Like, if we were business partners, and if there is any hesitancy in that question, then the answer is no, just don't do it. If you do think like I'd be happily in business with this person for the rest of my life, then the answer is yes. The second filter is, typically there are things ignored when understanding like a team in an environment. It's like, well, do we think this is a good idea is often the filter for people to start an idea. But there are other things. Specifically, propensity for risk is one. The ability for that group to execute on the critical success factors of the business? And then do those people have connectedness up, down, and across the value chain? And those are three things that are ignored when evaluating. Like, we all agree this is a good business, but is this the right team? So one, would you be business partners for the rest of your life? And then on those three axes or filters, is this the right team? And I've kind of tried to use that to the best of my ability, when teaming up with people on businesses or investments.
Yeah. And on that business partner thing, the biggest thing I learned from just recently in terms of reading, and shout out to Naval. Is Naval a listener? Hi, Naval. Shout out to Naval, is partner with people who are smart and hardworking. Don't fall for the vanity story of promises of what people say they can deliver. Are they smart? Are they hardworking? That's what matters. And will you partner with this person? Another kind of like maxim is, would you work with this person forever? But also, would you work for this person? Like, if you, like, can you imagine yourself, like, if you're going to hire them to be your business partner or work for you or whatever it might be, would you work for that? Has to go both ways.
Well, I know
we got quote, play long-term games with long-term people.
There you go.
That's a good Ravikant quote. I like that.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Eric, I want to hear yours. And
I just dropped my left earbud right into my mezcal. So ask me anything.
Good job.
How does it smell? How does it taste?
and then I drank my mezcal.
Nice. Little earwax. I like that.
The TLDR, guys, is just partner with people that you respect and trust. That's it. Partner with people you respect, because you don't build anything on your own. You're gonna be teamed with others. Team with people that you respect and you trust. Period.
Yeah, and in your situation, you're very blessed. You have an amazing business partner, right? And that you really trust, and that's difficult to find.
It's rare, right? It's rare based on all of our combined experiences.
But it's also funny how this discussion about business, lessons quickly merged onto the people you work with, and the people, and I don't know. I just realized that we all kind of like settled in on very similar theme, and I think that's not too uncommon.
Yeah, can't do it alone. So that's a wrap. Shout out to everybody listening. We love you. Thanks for being here. Holla at us in the Discord.
Yeah. Thanks, Naval.
He is listening. I'm pretty sure of it.
Oh my God.
Sitting right next to me.
You're watching?
Boys.
The almanac is right there. Oh man. Elon's listening too. All right, boys.
All right.
Peace out. Great stuff. Later.